Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm talking about my top 10 tools that I reach for the most in card making. So to start off with, I'm talking about guillotines. I really like guillotines for paper cutting. I always have gone for the guillotine type rather than the paper trimmers. This is my favourite one. This is the Tim Holtz and Tonic guillotine. I've actually always had the Tonic brand. I just find them to work really nicely. I only just recently changed my guillotine that I'd had for about 10 years or so they do work for a long time. As you could see there, you can take off the handle for this one, and there's also an extra ruler at the back. This is to measure 12.5 inches so that you can measure all the way across. If you wanted to cut 12 by 12 paper, it's really handy just to have that extra piece there on the side, and then you can also take that off and add that back underneath as well when you're not using it. I tend to use this guillotine mostly for cutting larger pieces of cardstock. Say like if I'm making card bases, I'll cut my sheets in half, or if I'm making panels like this size here, or just for general cutting. For the most part, I tend to have all of my card bases cut already that I do cut myself on this guillotine. But like you can see here, you can cut small pieces, you can cut large pieces. It's really quite nice and it's got a lot of precision to it. You can cut about 3 sheets of card, about £100, I believe. I tend to just do the 2 at a time. I'm always worried, but the knife is really sharp, so it can definitely cut a lot of cardstock. As you can see here, the measurements are in inches and centimeters, which is really nice. And then you've got this plastic guard here. You can press that down to hold your paper in place or your cardstock, and it prevents you from cutting your fingers as well, which is always helpful. But it is, like I say, it's very sharp. I would keep this away from children. Next up is the Tonic guillotine, which is the mini version, and this is absolutely tiny, but it works in the same way as the larger guillotine. For this one here, there is a safety feature on the edge. There's an extra bit of plastic just at the edge here, and that fits into the arm of the guillotine, so when it's closed it's not going to accidentally pop up and you might cut yourself or anything like that. Obviously if you push up hard it is going to open, but for the most part that makes sure that it stays down. This is a really nice lightweight little guillotine. It measures 3.5 inches across the top, so it is tiny, but it's really good if you wanted to travel with it. But what I use it for the most is to cut smaller pieces of cardstock, so things like sentiment strips that I make a lot of. I just find that I get a bit more of kind of not a precision cut, because the other one cuts perfectly, but I feel that I have a bit more control over it because I can see a little bit better. I'm not kind of leaning over it. So next up is tweezers. I use tweezers all of the time. There are 3 that I use the most, which I'm going to share with you here. So the first ones here are some really inexpensive basic tweezers. I got these from a shop here in the UK called Boots, which is like a chemist, and they're just the cheapest tweezers that you can possibly find. And they're made for the beauty sector, but what I really like them for is to remove the backing off of foam tape or foam pads or double-sided tape or anything like that. They've got quite a nice tip on them. They're quite sharp, so they grab these kind of things really easily, and I just pretty much tend to use them for that purpose. Next up are some flat tweezers. These are from a brand called Anita's, which is a brand kind of like of Do Crafts here in the UK, and I really like them because, as you can see, they're absolutely flat, so they're really great for grabbing onto things like cardstock, especially things like sentiment strips or any small images that you're placing down onto your card, especially things like foam tape and that on the back. It's just quite nice. You can see exactly where you're placing them, and because of the angle of the tweezers, it doesn't hurt your hand or your wrist or anything, having your hand in a weird position and having them still flat, which is quite nice. They came in a pack of 4. I have no use for the other tweezers whatsoever, but I absolutely love these flat tweezers and I've been using them for years. And then last but not least, these are the reverse tweezers from EK Success, and these work in the opposite way to tweezers if you haven't already seen them. When you press down, they actually open rather than close. So they're really good for grabbing onto things that you're going to hold for a long time. So I'm going to be doing some embossing, for example, I often use these tweezers if I want to hold the cardstock. It just prevents my hand from getting fatigued because I'm not having to actually press down on anything. And they're really good for creating bows with ribbon and twine and stuff like that because it holds them in place, like I said, without you actually having to grip hold of the tweezers, which is nice. And I do look like that they have a safety cap on the edge. Next up is tape, and this is more like low adhesion tape rather than adhesive tape. So the first tape that I use a lot is this Scotch tape. This is kind of like the same as their invisible tape, but this is removable. And I use this all the time for die cutting. I really like that, like I said, it's removable, you can lift it up, it's got a very low adhesion to it, but it does still hold things in place. So like I said, I use it a lot for die cutting. I tend to hold dies in place and then run that through my die cutting machine. Because it's got such a low profile, it doesn't leave a dent or anything like that, which I know some other tapes do when you're die cutting. And it's just a really good all-round tape, and it's pretty inexpensive as well. And I just have it in this tape dispenser here, and I can just add in extra ones when I need to, when I run out. Next up is post-it tape. I absolutely love post-it tape. I use it more for masking rather than anything else. You can definitely use it to hold dies and things like that in place as well, but I do find that with some die cutting machines it does leave a dent, so I don't tend to do that very often. But it's got a really nice low adhesion to it, but again it lifts up really nicely. I tend to use it, like I said, for masking. So if I'm going to create like a line of colour or anything like that, like I'm doing ink blending on the top of a panel, I use this and I can ink blend really nicely and lift off the tape, and I find that it gives a really nice crisp line. And also when using this tape you can reuse it quite a few times. It really doesn't lose its stickiness very quickly. And I do find that most of the time I don't get ink transfer either if I'm using different colours, which is quite nice. And along the same lines, this is the post-it labelling tape, and this is basically the same thing but in a longer width. So it's as you can see, the depth, or the width I should say, is quite a lot bigger, and this is really nice if you want to mask off larger areas. It is a bit more difficult to get hold of in the UK, so I do buy it from Simon Says Stamp, and because of that I am a bit more conservative with how much I use of this. But like I said, it's really great if you're wanting to mask off a larger area, especially if you want to ink blend on the top of a card base and you want to mask off the back portion of the card. I use it for that quite a bit. You can definitely use it, like I said, for ink blending, but you can also do masking with it in terms of stamping. So you could stamp your image on it and cut it out, and it's really good for masking with stamping. Along the same kind of lines is the Memo tape from Heffy Doodle. This is the same kind of size as that other post-it tape, but it's got a bit of a less adhesion to it, I suppose. It's a little bit thinner, but it is again really nice, and again I use it more for things that I'm going to need a lot of masking on. Particularly good to hold down stencils and things like that. And I don't tend to use it really for ink blending, but it is a really nice tape, and you can refill that dispenser as many times as you want as well. And then last but not least is purple tape from Therm. This is more like masking tape. It's more got a kind of like coating on the top, but you can still rip it up quite easily. A lot of people use this as well for die cutting. I personally don't. I find that it's a bit too sticky for that. And I don't also use it for ink blending, but I'm showing here that you can use it quite nicely for ink blending as well. I tend to use it for things like stencils and that. You can remove the ink off the top of the tape, which is nice, so that you can reuse it many times, which is a really great benefit of this tape. And it also comes in a smaller size now as well, which I've just picked up, and I'll probably use this a bit more than the larger width. I do like that it comes in the two sizes now. Next up is the Splat Box from Tim Holtz, and I use this, as the name suggests, for splattering and spraying. It's really good to contain everything in one space, and so that all the splatter and the spray doesn't go all over your craft desk. This is made from cardboard, so it's really good to recycle when you've finished using it if it gets too dirty and you want to buy another one. It's got a nice opening at the front, and then you've got the sides and the back piece there as well. I do find that if I'm using quite a wet medium, that I tend to put a craft sheet down on the inside. I think this just preserves the length of the box. I know it kind of doesn't make sense really, but I like to do that. So if I'm using distress sprays like I'm doing here, I just tend to put that sheet down, and then I can wipe that clean away. But if I'm using sort of like an iridescent medium spray or anything like that, I don't put that sheet down. It's just, like I said, just to preserve it, especially if I'm using a lot of colour or anything like that. You could definitely create this out of a cardboard box yourself, but it's fairly inexpensive, and so I really do like that product. Next up are rulers, and I use rulers a lot in my card making. I use this one the most. This is a T-square ruler, and I really like it for making sure that things are straight. I do measure with it as well, but for the most part I like to make sure that things are straight with it. You can butt up the T portion of the ruler against your cardstock, and then you'll know that something is straight. So I can use it if I'm drawing out lines, or if especially I like to use it if I'm going to be sticking something down and I want to make sure that that's straight. So things like sentiment strips, it's really nice to do that with. The measurements are in inches and centimeters, which is really nice for both imperial and metric. This is a new addition to my craft room, and this is the Lawn Fawn ruler. I bought it in particular because I struggle with the imperial measurements. I was brought up with the metric system, and so I do struggle with things like what is 9/16 or something, for example. And so I thought this ruler would be really handy because it has every single measurement that you could ever think of on this ruler, and I'm probably mainly going to use it for that particular reason, because obviously it doesn't have metric on it as well, and I do still use metric in my ordinary life, I suppose, but it's going to be really handy for measuring out card bases and panels and things like that. The next ruler here is the Tim Holtz Idea-ology ruler, and this is really great if you want to make sure if something's centered or not. The markings are 0 in the middle, and then you've got the 1 either side, and then the 2, and then the 3 in that way. So it's really nice if you want to make sure if something's centered. But what I use it for the most is to use with a craft knife. The reason that I do this is because it's got a metal edge on one of the sides, and that's really handy so that your craft knife can kind of glide across it rather than actually kind of cutting into the plastic itself, which is nice. And so like I said, I use this a lot, this ruler, for cutting out things with my craft knife. Talking of craft knives, this is the Cricut True Control craft knife, which I absolutely love. I've gone through a lot of craft knives in my time of card making, and this is the one that I've stuck with the longest so far. What I really like is it's really easy to replace the blades. So you've got a dial on the edge there, and then if you push it open, or push the button I should say, then the blade comes out, which is really nice. It's quite a really good safety feature, especially for someone that is easily cut like I am. I'm a bit clumsy, so once you change the dial back to the lock position, then the blade doesn't come out, which is really nice. I really like that it's got a really nice cushioned grip to it as well, so it's quite easy to kind of grab hold of. The blades are really, really sharp. I haven't changed this blade yet since I've had this knife. I do have some spares, but actually I haven't needed to so far. It's very, very sharp. I find that even with thick cardstock, you can pretty much get away with just one kind of go. I don't know what the word is really, but you can just use it once rather than having to go over it a lot of times, which is quite nice. And like I said, it's got a really nice precision tip to it as well, and it's really nice and comfortable to hold. Next up are ink blending tools, specifically the brushes. I've been really getting into using the brushes recently. I do still use the ink blending tools from Ranger, and I will share those at the end, but I've been really loving the brushes. These are from Amazon. I got a pack of them. You get quite a lot in a pack for a pretty reasonable price. These are the brand You Spicy. I have no idea what that brand is. I've never used them before for anything else, but these are made for makeup, but they blend really nicely with inks. And they've got a really nice soft tip to them. The bristles are really soft, and I wasn't sure if I was going to use brushes so much when I first bought them, and so I invested in those, and like I said, they were pretty good value. I did get a couple from Picket Fence Studios. These are more on the expensive side purely because they're made for the craft industry rather than the beauty industry, but these have got a really nice kind of grip to them. You can kind of move the handle quite easily. Next up are these ones from Tailored Expressions. I really like these because they've got white bristles, and also they're all one size and they're color coded, which really speaks to my heart. I absolutely love that they're color coded. Quite often I've gone for the blending tools and not realized what color of ink is on it, so that's really nice that these kind of take out that problem. What I really like about these brushes in particular for ink blending is that you can get a really nice soft light blend with them. They're particularly good if you want to blend out into white, which I do quite often. They've got, like I said, a really nice smooth blend to them. If you want to build up the colour, which you definitely can, you can just go over the area multiple times. So it does take a while if you do want a more saturated colour with these brushes. But if you want a light coverage, these are definitely the way to go rather than the ink blending tools from Ranger. And I'm just going to share those with you in a minute so you can see the comparison between the two different methods. But like I said, I do still really like the ink blending tools with the foam on the bottom, and I use them mostly if I want a deeper saturation of colour, especially if I'm going over a panel completely, if I'm not sort of blending into white or anything like that. And like I said, you can get a really deeper colour with these, but they are difficult if you do want to blend into white. But you could obviously definitely use the two combined together. So if you wanted it to be a lot darker at the top and lighter at the bottom, you could go in with the ink blending tool at the top and then go in with the brush afterwards just to blend it out, which is a really nice way of using them both and getting a really nice coverage that you want to. Next up is actually two things in one. I was a bit cheeky and added them both in at the same time because I use them together. This is the jewel picker from Marvy, and it's really great to pick up in particular jewels, but you could definitely use it for sequins and confetti and things like that. I do tend to use it for jewels for the most part. It's got two ends, a larger end and a smaller end, and they've got kind of like a rubber coating on the end of it, and that helps to pick up anything that you're trying to pick up, because it's kind of like a sticky end, but it's not massively sticky, so it doesn't hold on to the jewels without letting go. I use jewels a lot with these trays. These are bead trays, and they're obviously a triangle shape, as you can see, and I really like them for taking out the jewels that I want to use out of the tub that I have them in, and it's really good that they're the triangle shape because you can funnel them back into your tub really easily. Obviously, if you're not as clumsy as I am, they all go back into the jar and not all over your craft desk, but never mind, for the most part they do go back into the jar. And the idea of these trays is that you can shake them and then all of the jewels face upwards. I personally don't find that it works that well for that purpose, but I do really like them just so that I can see the jewels a bit easier. They're a lot easier to grab rather than them being in a bag or in tubs or anything like that. As you can see, then I pick the jewels up with my jewel picker, and then if I have adhesive on my cardstock or wherever I'm adding them onto, then you can just pick those up and place them down. I do find that if my jewel picker isn't so sticky, I just wet it on the edge of my absorber cloth, which is usually wet, and then it just tends to help pick up the jewels a bit easier. And then, like I said, with the trays, you can just funnel those back into the jar. Next up are scissors. I use scissors a lot. I use them a lot for fussy cutting, but I also use them for different things as well. My favourite for fussy cutting are these EK Success Cutter Bee scissors. They've got a really nice sharp point on them, and they cut really nice and precisely. So like I said, I use them a lot for fussy cutting. These are my go-to scissors for fussy cutting. They're quite nice and small in size, which helps with fussy cutting. But like I said, they're also very sharp, and I have stabbed myself a few times on these scissors, but they're nice and lightweight and they fit really nicely in your hand. And along the same lines, these are the EK Success scissors, but these are the honeybee scissors, and they have a coating on them, a non-stick coating. So as you can see, they're exactly the same but with that coating, and it works really nicely for anything like adhesive. I've never had to clean these scissors, and I use them all the time for cutting foam tape or foam pads or double-sided tape or anything like that, and nothing has ever stuck to them, which is really great. So I use those two pairs of scissors a lot. But I also use the Tim Holtz scissors as well. These are the larger size. These are the 9.5 inch titanium shears, and I really like these for cutting things like if I've added something off the edge of a card base and then I want to cut it down. I tend to use these scissors. They do have a serrated edge on them. One side has a serrated edge and the other side doesn't. So I know that that puts off quite a lot of people, but as you're cutting, if you make sure that the logo is on the outside, you won't get the serrated edge. And if you have the logo on the inside, then you do get that serrated edge. So it's quite nice if you want to not have that serrated edge, that you can manage to as well if you want to. But they're a really nice sharp scissors, and they've got those nice sort of handles on them so that they don't constrict your hands. Next up are stamping platforms. I do have 3 different stamping platforms. I have the mini Misty, the original size Misty, and then also the travel size of the stamping platform from Tonic and Tim Holtz. I really like this platform because you can change the lid of it if you want to stamp clear stamps or rubber stamps, which is quite nice. And then also the edges of it are open, so you can use any size piece of cardstock in this as well. I do have the travel size rather than the original size, purely because I didn't think that I needed a bigger one, and I use it mostly for 6x6 background stamps. You can know it's no longer sold in America and Canada, I believe, but it is still sold in Europe, and it has a really great price point on it. Next up is the original size Misty. I do use this quite a lot, mainly again for things like background stamps or any larger stamps, but I do tend to use the mini Misty the most. This is a really nice tool though if you're going to be doing a lot of stamp layering stamps or like the colour layering ones, because you can move the images around inside the Misty and you've got a bit of extra time for that, or extra space I should say. And then I do like the bar magnets, and then I do put some washi tape on the edge of the Misties just to use as handles. That's the only downfall for me with these Misties, that they are a little bit harder to open and close, but if you just add a bit of washi tape onto that kind of solves the problem. So like I said, I use the mini one the most. I personally just find that the size works absolutely fine for me. This magnet here is from Amazon. I find that it's a bit better than the Misty one, purely because it's got a lower profile to it. So I'm sure you've seen me use the Misty if you've watched any of my videos before. I use it quite a lot for stamping. I do tend to use it upside down or the wrong way round than most people do. So my rulers are upside down. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. I find that it's easier to work this way. I believe a lot of left-handed people use it this way. So it's no problem for me, but you may want to keep that in mind. But the best thing with this tool is that you can double stamp everything. So I didn't get a great impression on the first time, but when I stamped it again I got a perfect impression, and that's really what is the great thing with using stamping tools. So that was a very quick look at my top 10 tools for card making. Links to the products that I shared will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.